And that was kind of the first big trauma and difficulty that I had to face. And it was a really big setback. It was, a doctor first thing said to me, I brought up my huge passion, this goes back to middle school. Like I've just told this tale, like I've oriented my universe around making these decisions to pursue what I love, to pursue physical challenges, to pursue and express myself through these mediums. And, the doctor's response was, oh yeah, you're probably just going to let that part of your life go. And I can just remember and then he just walks out of the room to go see his next patient, drops that line and then walks out. And I remember just my spirit started sinking because it's like the only version of myself I had known up until that point was expressing himself through physical activity. And I loved that version of myself. And so, at first it was this huge sinking feeling, but then in the very next thought, it was this you don't know me. You don't know the work I'm willing to put in for what I want. You don't know how much I'm willing to suffer. And right there, I made the promise to myself. It's like, no. I will do whatever work necessary to get back.
Welcome back to the Yogi Triathlete Podcast. We are Jess and BJ, and we're here to shine a light on those who are living what sits on their hearts. People who continue to move forward despite evidence to the contrary, obstacles in the way, challenges, and even traumas that upend a seemingly on-track life. People who pick themselves up by focusing on what they can do and show us all that with persistence and patience, all things are possible. People like Jason Hardrath, the King of FKTs and subject of the Athletic Brewing Journey to 100 documentary. You may have already heard Jason's name being dropped on this podcast during our interview with Bill Schufelt from Athletic Brewing, or perhaps when we interviewed Jason's partner, the lovely Queen of FKTs, Ashley Winchester. Jason is the first human to complete 100 FKTs, or fastest known time routes, a number he has since surpassed and in fact did so during his 100th FKT attempt when he conquered Washington State's 100 highest peaks known as the Bulger's List. Jason has been on the media train talking about his outstanding accomplishment, and we'll be linking up to some of those podcasts, including the Journey to 100 film in the show notes, because there's no way we're going to be able to cover all the incredible stories, details, and obstacles that he overcame during that project within this hour, especially since he's made his return to triathlon, and we gotta talk about that. We're excited to get to know this guy and share him with you all. Jason, welcome to the show.
What an amazing introduction. So glad that this came together. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to chat about as much as we can fit.
Awesome. So you've been talking about this. You've been doing so many podcasts. You've literally been on this media train. But one thing I didn't include in the intro is really where it all began. And because I love to hear you tell that story about where it all began, because it was a long time ago that you started to set goals and smash those goals.
Absolutely. I guess you have to rewind way, way, way back. I was an ADHD little kid who absolutely couldn't sit still. From a very early age, movement was absolutely essential. And so all through my childhood, very animated, very struggled in all traditional settings, where you're supposed to sit still and shut up. And, not so good at that. Still to this day, not so good at that. I'm well known among my staff members for completely missing paperwork and missing emails. My principal made fun of me for not even getting my contract signed on time. And she's like, oh my gosh, I freak out about that every year to be the first one done. It's like, here it is like a month late and you still haven't done it. It's like, yep, pretty much every year. So terrible employee, great teacher. But same thing as a kid, just struggled with homework, struggled with social relationships, struggled with any sort of structured system or institution. But movement was something I could do. And so a big hinge piece of that happened in middle school, where I had this chance to chase a 6-minute mile. I was running like somewhere mid sixes, 6:20 maybe. And I can look back and be like, that's, wasn't that easy of a mark to shave, 20, 25 seconds off of a mile time. But back then I didn't know any better. And And I set this goal to try to run under 6-minute miles and under a 6-minute mile and be the fastest PE miler for the school that year. And worked all school year long, putting in extra laps whenever we would go outside. And that final PE mile of the school year, managed to run through the line. And I can still remember all that mattered was the teacher read 5 at the front end of it. And it was a 5:57 is what it ended up being. But I just remember flopping into the grass and just being in pain all over my body, but being so deeply gratified, so deeply pleased with what I'd done. And that just locked in and solidified this goal-setting mindset. Like, okay, if I'm willing to work hard, if I'm willing to suffer, if I'm willing to put in the work, then I can achieve difficult goals. And it just sort of solidified that in my mind. And so, one thing led to another, where it's like, okay, I want to try to run in high school and I want to run on varsity. And then it's like, okay, I want to make it to state. And it's like, okay, when I'd done that, I was like, all right, I want to try to make it onto a college team. Now I had a reality check happen when I was in high school, where I thought, okay, my goal is to break the school record. And, the reality check there was, it's like, I got nowhere near that record, like not even remotely close. And so to face sort of a reality check that it's okay, I have limitations, but what can I still do within this space? Because clearly I still love it and I still enjoy pushing myself like this. And so the goal became like, all right, I want to run well enough to get myself onto a college team. And so I worked my butt off and raced my best and did a really good job of marketing myself as well, something that wasn't common back then. Put together videos with the help of my dad, and actually sent them out to coaches, which, nowadays that's totally commonplace, but back then it wasn't, and managed to get myself on a small NAIA college team and run through college as well. And, the story just goes on and on. I ended up, attempting to transition up to the marathon during college, kind of unsuccessfully, wasn't quite ready for it yet. But then when I graduated university, I, biked across the United States. The idea had stuck in my head when I first bought a road bike. Like the moment I hit 20 miles an hour, my first ride ever, I'm like, I should bike across the USA. Just hit me like a brick out of the sky, and then just stuck. And so my greatest fear graduating college, if you'd asked me, I would have articulated it back then. It's waking up 30 years from now and wondering what the heck I did with my life. Like that was this visceral fear that I had as I graduated. And I consider myself lucky to have had it at such a young age. And so when the thought crossed my mind again of biking across the USA, I was like, oh man, I could get stuck in a job. I better do it now. Now is the time. And that was sort of the first grand adventure, if you will, and succeeding at that grand adventure and having the goodness of people, my faith in people sort of built by doing this big project, and raised $7,000 for a child center to be built in Guatemala. And people, basically, every night I had no clue where I was going to sleep, and I would call ahead to churches and organizations in a town I thought was a reasonable distance to bike. And every night I ended up with a place to stay. And so it's just this cool experiment in the goodness of humanity. And I think it set the tone for me to have this belief about, okay, if you're aiming at something worthwhile, people will take note and come alongside you. And so, then continued on to get into Ironman triathlon, because it's okay, I clearly love to bike and I'm actually pretty good at it. I can look back now and be humorously I'm not really built to be a runner. Too bad I fell in love with running, but also I still totally love running. But if I'd fallen in love with cycling at a young age, maybe I would have actually amounted to something. I was a much better cyclist than I was a runner. And so then the question was well, how can I combine these two? And the obvious answer is, well, I guess I have to learn how to swim. So I signed up for my first full Ironman, because that's how you make the transition into triathlon, is go straight into full Ironman when you can't swim more than 3 lengths of a pool. And taught myself how to swim over the course of 6 months, clearly asking every single person who could swim better than me for any advice they had, whether they were interested in giving me advice or not. And did the Ironman St. George the final year that it was a full Ironman. And it was a brutal year, second highest attrition rate of any Ironman ever at that point, up until that point, and managed to survive it. And got through. And then, I guess I'll just keep running with the story. Why not? then 2015 rolls along. I'd qualified for a couple of world championships in the 70.3 distance. Again, by just putting in a tremendous amount of work and training and sort of seeing how to piece this together and finally put together sort of my perfect day, if you will. I qualified for the 2014 70.3 World Championships at Calgary, Canada. And then like 3 weeks later, because of the weird Ironman calendar, I qualified for the 2015 World Championships at Lake Stevens in Washington. And then finished at the 2014 World Championships. And my training was like reaching a whole nother level where I was going for like 100. I can remember on the Sunday, I think it was like May 2nd or something. I might be a little off on my days there, but basically the Sunday of this May day, I went for a 140-mile bike ride, and I got off and went for a run and felt great, and like went and played Frisbee with my friends afterwards. It was like, sweet, like my training, my fitness is on a whole nother level. Like this is the year I'm going to like successfully transition up to full Ironman at a competitive, like not just finish, but compete the whole distance level. And then that Tuesday, I went out the car window in a rollover accident and broke 9 ribs, collapsed a lung, broke my shoulder in 2 places, put contusions through my internal organs, and ripped the ACL and LCL apart in my right knee. And that was kind of the first big trauma and difficulty that I had to face. And it was a really big setback. It was, a doctor first thing said to me, I brought up my huge passion, like, this goes back to middle school. Like I've just told this tale, like I've oriented my universe around making these decisions to pursue what I love, to pursue physical challenges, to pursue and express myself through these mediums. And, the doctor's response was, oh yeah, you're probably just going to let that part of your life go. And I can just remember and then he just walks out of the room to go see his next patient, drops that line and then walks out. And I remember just my spirit sort of sinking because it's like the only version of myself I had known up until that point was expressing himself through physical activity. And I loved that version of myself. And so, at first it was this huge sinking feeling, but then in the very next thought, it was this like, you don't know me. You don't know the work I'm willing to put in for what I want. You don't know how much I'm willing to suffer. And right there, I made the promise to myself. It's like, no. Like I will do whatever work necessary to get back. And, it's again, I had that reality check in high school where it's like, you can't set unreasonable goals. So it's like, I couldn't say, I'm going to compete in world championships again or da-da-da-da. The promise in the moment was I'm going to do whatever work it takes to get back to some version of what I love. And that was the agreement with myself right in that moment. And it was a painful road back, and it was hard, and there were a ton of setbacks, and it took over 2 years. And I had to reset my whole mindset to like go back to ground zero. It's like we think we own the results of what we do, but it's like, no, all you ever have is the process, right? In the snap of fingers, it's like anything you think you've built, anything you think you own, anything you think you've created is gone. And all you're left with is the process. So you better actually love the process that got you there in the first place. And that's what I had to fall back on. It's like, okay, I know this process that we all learn as endurance athletes, that it's like, okay, I'm going to embrace and even fall in love with more discomfort now, more pain now for better outcomes later, more abilities later. I'm going to do the hard work now so I can do more later. And that's sort of the agreement any athlete makes. Like that's the agreement of within an individual interval training session. Like, okay, I'm going to suffer through this repeat. Okay, again, and again and again, right? Into the mesocycles and the macro cycles, like all of it is this process of believing in the process. So just leaned into that through this PT and recovery. And also discovered, I knew enough because I'm a PE teacher. I'm in my PE office. I don't know whether the video will play with this or not, but I've got my bib numbers on the wall from the 143 different races I've done hanging behind me because it starts conversations with students about life and decisions and running and chasing what makes you come alive. And what I knew to become a teacher, what I had to study was biomechanics. And it's like, okay, when you're walking up and down steep hills, you don't need the same range of motion in your knee as you do when you want to run efficiently. And it's like, okay, well, I guess I'm a hiker now. And so I started hiking hills, and hills led to mountains, and mountains led to bigger mountains. And pretty soon I was getting into mountains that, oh, these are technical at the top. Like I need to be able to rock climb. So it's like, all right, I guess I'm a rock climber now. And so I had to go embrace the wonderful feelings of being willing to suck at something new after being used to being very good at something in the past. And that's always a fun thing. And I took a note from my kindergartners there, right? Because you could hand a kindergartner a basketball and they'll shoot for hours, missing every single time, and never lose any enthusiasm because they don't have that self-judgment yet that we develop as adults where we're like, oh, I suck at this. I need to leave. Like people are going to think I'm terrible. And it's like I noticed that come on right away when like 11-year-olds were better climbers than me in the climbing gym. I was literally the worst person there. And so like, yeah, anyways, endured that and built these climbing skills, got to where I could climb technical peaks. And, well, over the same interval of time, got back to where I could at least jog and run a little bit for a sustained distance, go 10 or 20 miles and not have my knee swell up into a grapefruit. And then it was natural to go, well, let's combine these things and see what happens. Let's go run between technical peaks. Let's go run and bike and swim between technical peaks. Let's see what's possible. And then luckily discovered Fastest Known Times as a community and a forum for like sharing that with others. So it was really, it was almost an obvious choice. Like, oh, this is already what I'm doing. It's already what I love, even without a formal entity around it. So let's just jump in and do 100 of these because it means I'll do 100 things that I love doing.
Was that a decision you had really soon after discovering FKT? Like,
very early.
I'm going to do 100.
Very sort of like the brick out of the air when I first rode the bike. I hit 20 miles an hour and I'm like, bike across the country. It was kind of the same thing. It's like discovered FKTs, did a few and submitted some of my first FKTs on my list are actually things that I broke the record on or set the record on before I even knew I was like doing an FKT. It was just like I was out pushing hard in the mountains anyways. And then kind of was like retroactively was like, that's a really cool route. Other people would really like this route, and did the research to see if anybody had already done it. And nobody had like done it or done it fast or at least reported it in any way. And so it's like, cool, I'll go ahead and report these. And yeah, so very early on, it was like, okay, I'm going for 100 of these. And it took me a while to like voice that, because obviously it's like you make some bold, wild claim like that. Because I think the most a person had when I started was like 47 or something. And so you make some wild claim like, oh yeah, I'm going to do 100 of these would have been kind of ridiculous in most people's eyes. So it's like, that's for me. And, everybody else can just think whatever they want to think.
So when you rode your bike, 20 miles and you were like, I'm going to go across country, you decide early on that you're going to do 100 FKTs. Is this coming from like intellect, or is this coming from a connection to something deeper, like intuition? Do you feel it? Like, do you feel a knowing like, oh God, I'm going to do this? Or is it like, oh, this is a cool idea. Let's go for it.
I think it aligns. It definitely aligns on a deep level. I mean, I think it has that cool idea element to it as well. It's a bit of both, but there's also, like this, like deeper sense of like, oh, this would be of value. This would be of importance. Because I think something that spoke to me from a very young age, I actually just chatted with someone about this. There's a couple of quotes that really spoke to me when I was younger. The first one is, no stream rises higher than its source. And so I think one of the driving, orienting things in how I make decisions in my life is sort of this sense of sage wisdom and becoming someone who can give sage wisdom. Like that's an oriented thing. It's why I became a teacher. I didn't become a teacher because it's like, oh, I want the paycheck, or oh, I didn't have anything better to do. It's like, no. What's something I derive an incredible amount of value from? Creating aha moments for other people, creating breakthroughs where something was impossible or perceived as impossible, and now it's not. And so if you take and apply the ancient Chinese wisdom, no stream can rise higher than its source, then intuitively you go, okay, I need to do everything I can to aim as high as I can to test myself to become a better version of myself so that I can be that higher source for others. Because if I don't bother to become anything, then I have nothing to teach. You can only teach what you learn. You can only teach what you become. And the thing, again, being sort of authentic to myself, the thing I've naturally had the most drive toward are things that are physical in their expression, physical challenges, physical pursuits, physical tests. And so 8-year-old me would be very proud that I continued along those lines. So the second quote that sort of informed, I think, how I ended up where I am is a mentor of mine said to me at a very young age, well, I guess I wasn't that young. It might have been middle school age. Human beings are like a tube of toothpaste. You find out what's truly inside when they get squeezed. And that really stuck with me, where it's like, oh yeah, like the veneer most people can keep on, the performance most people can keep on when life is all going perfectly and everything's just right. It's easy to be nice to people when everything's good in life, but who are you when stuff is crumbling down around you? What do you have to say? Who can you be for others in those moments? And I was like, oh, for some reason that really resonated with me. And it made me want to pursue things that boiled me down to that core, where it's like, who's down in there? Like all of the busyness of society and the performances and acts and roles that we go through. It's like, when all of that's gone, who am I when I'm raw and when things aren't going right? And that's the me that's most important to get to know. And so, yeah, I think all of that dovetails into why I would have sort of an intuitive sense and a deeper sense of like, no, I need to go out and pursue these big challenges, and I need to pursue these things that are in alignment with what I see. I don't know, someone much smarter than me, Jordan Peterson, one of the ways he puts it is he asked the question, what should you do, in the sense of what would society have you do? What would your family have you do? Like all of the different voices that are out there. What should you do? And also your own expectations for yourself. And then the next layer of question is, what could I do? So it's like some things are out of your control. It's like, oh, I can't just become a millionaire tomorrow and donate all the money to help somebody out. It's like, that's impossible. So I can't do that. But what could I do? And then the last question you ask after you've boiled that down is, what would I do, or what will I do? And then that gets down to the things that's like, oh, I can actually have the passion and the follow through and can take control here and now to do this actual thing. I can execute, it's actionable. And I think that's just sort of like the process that I followed, where it's like, okay, seek the next challenge, seek the next challenge, seek the next challenge. It's not like I knew I was going to be breaking the record on climbing 100 peaks when I started climbing, or started doing FKTs. I just was pursuing the next size up challenge. And then I arrived at a place where it was a reasonable decision that the next step was to attempt to climb 100 peaks that nobody tried to climb that fast or even in a single season before. So yeah, I guess that's a really long answer, but I think I got to the core of your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you're out there doing it for the greater good. If you look at it like that, you're doing it for the greater good. You're doing self-development. You're putting yourself in that Grand Canyon, trying to figure out how to get out in the most extreme circumstance so you can gain experience to then share with others and inspire them to believe that, hey, guess what? I'm not the only one that can do it. You all can do it too. It's possible.
Absolutely.
But you got to put yourself in that predicament. That's where I think when Jess was talking about the mind interrupts that process and it says, whoa, pump the brakes. Hold on. Logistically, how's that going to happen? I don't have the money to financially do it. I need to get all this fitness, and all these, let's call them excuses, flood in, and then you pause and you stop. Not you, obviously, but most people out there. And so now that you're on this path, Jason, can you see that pretty prominently in others? I know you work with kids a lot, but can you see that in other adults where it's clearly they're just holding themselves back from this joy that they can experience? They're so close to it.
Absolutely. I use the commonly known phrase, self-limiting beliefs. Like I pick up on them very keenly within even ordinary conversation. If ordinary conversation is, one of the side effects of being ADHD is it's tough for me to tune stuff out. So even if I'm just in a room and I hear a phrase that is a self-limiting belief, I'm like, whoa. And like, so I'm very keen on those, and I notice them in myself too. Like when, something might pop out of my mouth, I'm like, wait a minute, that's self-limiting. I'm holding myself back there. And obviously I have blind spots like anybody, but occasionally I'm lucky enough to have the awareness to notice myself doing them as well. But yeah, no, it's absolutely huge. And I think it's very easy within our nature to create a web of like excuses, if you will, or a web of beliefs that succeed at holding us back. It's way easier to do an apathetic nothing than to do a meaningful something. And I think, sometimes people insultingly use the phrase like, put yourself together. But I think there's a reason we reach for that phrase, because I think, we know intuitively that we're not just computers. It's not just an on-off switch. It's like you have hundreds of different instincts. You talk to somebody that gets married at a young age, and even if they have a happy relationship, they kind of go, I kind of wonder if I made the decision too soon. And you talk to somebody that hasn't been in a sustained relationship, and they're like, oh, it's so hollow and empty and da-da-da. Even if they have no problems connecting with someone of the opposite sex, or if they're into the same sex, that too. But like, there's multiple instincts and drives within us as human beings. Drives to explore, drives to play, drives to be creative, drives to find a partner, drives to, go out and have fun and to do new things. So it's like you're always wrestling so many different parts of yourself. And so to put oneself together is to find a way to stack all of those pieces as we each experience them individually to actually move towards something that's meaningful to us, instead of to stop ourselves from moving towards something meaningful. And I think we don't give enough credit to how difficult that actually is. I don't think we applaud people nearly enough for when they actually manage to put themselves together in a way that they're moving towards something. And yeah, it's, working with kids, like I get to see and be a part of that initial process. And so I think maybe I just get to be a little closer to it than most people are. Yeah, but it's absolutely something that needs to be celebrated when we see it in others. Because I think it goes uncelebrated often. Sort of people are like, oh, you should be doing something and it should matter to you. No, that's a process actually. That's a hard thing to do. It's way easier to just listen to what you're told and to fall in line and to sort of defer that responsibility, and then wake up one day and be like, well, why am I here? And what am I doing? And does it matter to me? That's a non-zero number of people have that experience every single day of sort of waking up to the life they've arrived at. So yeah, definitely something that, again, making an easy question a lot longer than it needs to be. Definitely something that's on my mind.
Yeah, no, I love to hear you talk. That was one of the things that I was looking forward to in this interview, is that you articulate things very well. You're very open, very generous with what you share. And self-limiting beliefs, oh man, I'm right there with you. Like I'll hear myself use like the words of doubt, like, oh, I hope, or, like maybe. And immediately when I'm awake enough to catch myself, it's like, woof, okay, walk the talk, And this idea of like falling in line and just doing what you're told, yeah, temporary relief for, I think, long-term misery, right? I think that we have to fall down on the ground to pull ourselves back up, because we have to learn that process, because we have to have that contrast to grow. We need that. If we didn't know what misery was, we wouldn't know what joy was, and we wouldn't seek joy or adventure if we didn't know what boredom was. So when I look at the role that you play in the lives of these young children, And, they're in, if I'm to use a word from like Toltec wisdom, which is like they're in the domestication process, right? They're young, their minds are getting molded. The belief systems of their parents are going in there, belief systems of people, like conversations that they're hearing, they're getting domesticated, right? So we got to do that so we can live in this world and follow the rules and all of that. But at some point, we also have to discover, which is what you've discovered, is like, who are you and what matters to you, and celebrate your uniqueness and share your gifts. So I want to hear about what the kids' reaction was, and also your experience when you screened the film for them, as they're looking at someone who seemingly has no limits whatsoever, and they're watching Journey to 100. I'm assuming they saw it.
They did. I showed it to them here at the school because, I didn't realize that it was locally going to gain any traction. But actually the local arts theater ended up doing a whole screening where they bussed other students from other schools. And it's like, oh, should have waited and bussed our students too, but instead showed it in the classroom. But I don't know, it gave it a more intimate experience than if they'd just been a part of a room full of 500 other kids. So it was probably better for them in the bigger picture. But yeah, getting to show them the film was fun because, I tell them stories and I derive a lot of lessons, if you will, or, not so much like what I teach to the whole class very often, although it's always embedded in there. There's always layers of this stuff in anything I say because I can't help but think the way I think and believe the way I believe. I've built myself to be this way. So it's always layered in there. But when I pull kids aside, there's definitely special stories that I derive and pull from experiences out in nature and pushing myself. But yeah, getting to finally show them a visual depiction of what they'd heard stories of and what they'd kind of heard referenced was, it was really cool to sort of have them go, whoa. And then they asked fabulous questions. But it's kind of fun because one of the promises I made myself when I stepped into this career and this job is we all had that bad PE teacher, right? That was, I can think of one that I had that was like overweight with a Slurpee on the beer gut, rolling around on a golf cart, yelling at us to run. And it's like, okay, like now I can look back with the words to say, like, the reason something seemed wrong there is because it was inauthentic, right? What the person was asking of us and telling us was important did not in any way match up with what they were embodying. And so I made a promise off of this intuition to myself that's like, all right, if I ever lose the passion to the degree that I look nothing like what I teach, then I'll step away and do something else. Because it's like, I'm smart enough, I'm clever enough that I'll figure out a way to make money, probably more money than I make as a teacher. And I won't be ruining kids' lives. So yeah, no, there's always this agreement with myself. And the fun part with that is even, we also all can remember PE teachers that were these larger than life characters in our mind just because they even did a few things that were physically strong or physically active or could throw a ball really far or kick a ball really far. And it was just like, whoa. And so it's really fun for me, kind of thinking from that child's mind to go, wait a minute, like I've managed to cultivate myself as this person where no matter how many layers they go up and advance themselves, they'll always kind of go back and be like, wait a minute, he still seems like a larger than life character. And that I don't know, there's just this little layer of fun to me for that. Like maybe that's only just personal gratification, but I get a good degree of amusement thinking through how I'll be some old man in a wheelchair somewhere and they'll still be going like, how did he do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. They're going to be telling their kids about their PE teacher. Like, absolutely. You are leaving a mark on their lives. And do you hear any of those self-limiting beliefs at a young age with them? Like, and if so, how do you work with them on that?
Well, I guess a few different ways to approach that question. One of the ways that stands out to me, like, a lot of, when they get to the older ages, there was that sort of wow factor of like seeing the film, to reference back to the last question. But the coolest part to me is thinking more about the younger ages, like the kindergarten and the first grade, where there was less of a wow factor to them. And the reason why is, in order for something to wow you, you have to have a concept of what normal is. And that's formed between the ages of like 3 and 6 years old, 2 and 6 years old. And so the coolest part to me is that the person I am and the things I do for these kids that are really young, under this age of 6, that's a rough age they say is when that sort of solidifies for us our concept of normal. It's less that they're going to be impressed by me. That's much less important. And more that they're just going to accept that I am a totally standard and normal adult outcome, adult behavior. And it's like, that to me is way cooler than just impressing them or inspiring them. It's like, no, like that's going to redefine their whole concept of normal their entire life. And that to me is the coolest outcome of being able to sort of live what I teach and have that be something that I then also love. And I think they all circle into each other. So I guess that kind of answers your question, but maybe not quite.
No, I love it. No, you just kind of shifted it a little bit into really what I was saying before is like they're getting all of these belief systems downloaded. And one of the ones that you are offering just merely by your existence and your passion and your ability to follow through is that there are no limits, which is pretty amazing.
Well, I wanted to ask, being, in this teaching element and what your kids and what people who view this movie and who are now aware of you through podcasts is noticing a level of detachment and how you work through putting all this energy into FKTs only to see an FKT slip away to another person. So now you get it, you get one, and I think you had said like almost 40% have already been surpassed already. So you kind of have to be in this element of like, I'm going to put all this energy in here for the love of it. I'm going to accomplish my goal, but then these people are going to one up me again, and I need to leave that behind and move forward. So there's this odd space. And I think this is where, racing comes in, where you're like, because you're doing FKTs, which is a form of racing, but this attachment to where you were at one point, that you're owed something versus moving on to like some freedom into what's ahead.
I think this actually dovetails into something I regularly talk with my students about, because I think we as Americans have a very faulty concept of what competition really is. I think when you look at competition with the full wide angle lens on, and you look at what service it has within the human experience, is it's not about the elevation and the winning of any one person. It's the fact that the process of us testing ourselves around one another causes us to be better, to reach a little higher. If you're neck and neck with someone, of course you're going to try to take that one step harder to go that little bit better to best them. Like, so it's not that I'm ever disappointed that someone surpasses me. It's like, that's the beauty of it, right? That person saw what I did and bettered themselves. And it's like, I can't feel mad about that. Like, that pleases me. That's gratifying to me to see that it's like, oh, like this person saw what I did and then came out and put themselves together, again, to use that phrase, put themselves together in a way that they could go out and do this thing. And, what if, I can ask myself the beautiful what if question, what if I hadn't done the thing and then therefore they also didn't do the thing, right? So in a way, it makes me proud and happy rather than disappointed and angry that others come along to test themselves on the test pieces. And in a way, there's a validation of the test itself, right? If it's valuable enough for the next person to come along and work even harder than I did to best me, then that must mean it was also a valid test for me to pursue. Because when I started FKTs, they were nowhere near as popular as they are now. And at the time a person might be listening to this podcast, they'll probably be even more popular. So I started this, it was still very niche and not as wide. I mean, COVID was an explosion in FKT awareness. Prior to that, it was a pretty niche community where like people kind of knew about it, I think within ultra running circles. and a few within like mountaineering or rock climbing circles, but that was pretty much it. Backpackers too, because of the long trail FKTs. But yeah, it was a much more niche community than what it's grown into, which it's cool to see that growth. But yeah, for me, the spirit of competition is that of, and this is the difference between the person that's really rude to the people they beat after they've done it, right? Because they think, I'm better than all of you. Instead of being like, I'm so grateful that you all were here because you pushed me to break this record or accomplish this goal or set this, time, where if I just had to show up and do it solo by myself with no framework, like I might not have even done it to begin with. And it's like, it to me, it's a failure of sight, a failure of vision to not acknowledge the beauty of the entire amalgamation of humanity doing a thing. It's very, very myopic and self-centered to be like, I'm angry that my record got beat. So I don't know. I guess that's how I'd answer that question.
Yeah, I think you'd lose your likability a little bit. For sure.
Well, I think that opens the doorway to a discussion on competition. I think what you shared there is like, let's reframe what we're doing out there. I think we have gotten overly consumed. Personally, I feel like we got overly consumed with performance and numbers and data and information. Not that it's wrong, but it's our relationship to this information. And in your case, you just shifted right to gratitude. I'm grateful that I have the ability to get out there and push other people to be better. Like, what a gift. What an amazing gift. Yeah.
So speaking of beating, you crushed the Bulger's List previous FKT by how long? Can you tell our listeners?
What is it, like 360 days or something?
Because you did it in 50 days.
I did it in 50 days, and the previous record was 410. Yeah. So
spectacular.
It was but I mean, again, I have to be fair. I have to be fair to the person that came before me. I have to be fair to Eric Gilbertson. I did it in a completely different style. I showed up with the mindset of, I'm not going to go home from first peak to last peak, not going to go home till it's done. And he did it. He was bouncing back and forth between work. And so it's unfair for me to lay claim to this big, bold, beat the FKT by a year thing without also acknowledging that he was doing it in a very different style, with very different limitations. So, yeah, definitely would never want him to come across an audio where I was being like, beat that sucker by da-da-da, because then I become that myopic person. No, and he was hugely helpful in the process of doing the 6 months of planning that was necessary to figure out how this thing could fit into 50 days. Without his help, probably it wouldn't have come together as well. So definitely like huge gratitude there. And again, like the spirit of competition at its best, like, I did a thing, but now I see how, because of my experience, I see how someone could do it better. And if you're willing to put in the work, I'll help you. So yeah, definitely gratitude toward him as well.
Yeah. I love how you just recognized him, because he also had different challenges. You had challenges, he had challenges, right? Balancing work. And it's not like he did a peak and was like, I got to rest for 3 months, right? It was, he was coming at it from a different perspective, a different plan, a different goal, a different adventure than yours. But I love that he helped you and you are ready to help the next person. Yeah,
that community aspect. I don't know if you followed the sports this weekend, but the sub 7 and sub 8 attempts were only possible, and Kipchoge's 2 hour through community. The power of community allowed all these things to happen. And I think it's kind of understated a little bit, but it was great to see during the finish of those races this weekend, the whole team, the collective was participating in the win. And I feel like that's what's happening in this FKT arena, knowing that, there's these unplanned routes. There's people that have only done it once or twice, and let's pull our information together to get you the coordinates, to get you the GPS, to get everything possible to make it happen. And I feel like the power of community is rising up further than it ever has. Do you feel that?
Yeah, I mean, I always hesitate to use a phrase like "than it ever has," because I think the scientific method and scientific thinking allowed us to create distinctions where there used to not be them, because we could see like, oh, this is the objective thing and what are the objective properties of that thing, where more ancient mindsets endowed the nature of the thing with all of what its experience was, how it affected you, right? So the emotions a thing caused were kind of almost a part of the thing, is a way of saying that. And so I think maybe those that came before us a lot longer were in touch with this a bit more, that it's like, oh, cooperation and competition are actually very closely related. They're not two separate ideas. They're very closely related. And so maybe it's more a rediscovery of like, oh yeah, community and acknowledging how much we stand on one another's shoulders is a really important thing. Honoring those that came before is a really important thing. Because we'd maybe forgotten it for a while.
Yeah.
I like that perspective.
I think they did an excellent job with the documentary Journey to 100. I think you agree with that as well. But I mean, here we're talking about...
Lauren did an awesome job. Yeah, I'm just gonna shout her out. Lauren was an amazing director. Aiden did an awesome job with his edit. Everyone else who was associated, Andrew out there with a camera, the whole crew, like a little behind the scenes thing. They spent a night with no sleeping gear and no food on the side of Little Tahoma to make sure they got a shot of me, because they didn't know when they had to be there. Because if a traverse had worked that wasn't melted out, I would have been there that same day as I did Rainier. But instead, it was melted out, and so I had to go all the way around. So it wasn't until the next morning that I was coming up. So they basically spent a night on the side of Little Tahoma to be sure they got this shot. It's like, man, the level of commitment that went into bringing this film together was absolutely astounding. So yeah, mad props to them.
Yeah, I don't know how they created such a comprehensive film in 30 minutes is beyond me. Like that's mastery. But is there a story that comes to mind that maybe isn't in the film that you would like to share?
Oh, so much. So obviously, and this is totally normal for people that have films made of them. The first time I watched it, I couldn't help but think and be sad about all the things that didn't make the final cut, right? Because this was the story of my life, chronicling like being the ADHD kid and what that process was like, and the relationship with my dad and how there were tensions there. And then going into the car accident, and it like flies past the car accident in like a matter of a few seconds. And it's like, oh man, that was 2 years of my life where I had to redefine how I interacted with my own identity. And then the 4-year FKT project, and then 50 days of continuous effort for the Bulgers, all put into a 30-minute film. And they did an amazing job. But obviously, stuff has to be cut out. And so, I mean, I could answer this question in so many ways. Like my ADHD brain is bouncing all over the place right now to try to be like, which one is the most important? So that all being said, I guess I'll just pull out, since the film is pretty buoyant and the final edit didn't include any of the footage or storytelling from some of the hardships faced, maybe I'll describe a story where things got difficult. So my girlfriend, Ashley, my partner, Ashley, she's a mountain guide, and she had a chance to guide with Awe Expeditions, an all women's, international guiding company. And they were going to guide on Shasta, but it was right in the middle of my effort. So she was going to have to leave, and it caused her great grief and strife, where it's like, oh, this is a wonderful opportunity to do a really good thing, but also like it means I'm going to leave you out there on your own. And at the same time, my climbing partner Nathan Longhurst, who ended up climbing 65 of the peaks with me, and then he'd skied some of them earlier that year and finished up the rest of them on his own to become the youngest finisher of the list ever. Super cool side outcome of this project was, because he climbed with me, he ended up becoming the youngest finisher. And he had to be gone because his sister was getting married. So here I am, middle of the project, like exhausted, tired, alone for a section, just completely alone, no support whatsoever. Like I'm going to drive myself, feed myself, climb the mountains myself, all of that. And it's like I've climbed mountains alone. A huge part of the early part of this FKT gauntlet was sort of that reclaiming personal power, which is why if somebody goes in meticulously, not that anybody ever would, but if somebody ever bothered to meticulously go through my list, they'd be like, wow, early on, he was very much about being solo and unsupported out there and on some very difficult, dangerous places. It's like, that was because that part of the gauntlet was my own rite of passage, I guess, for myself. After coming out of the accident, I needed to go out and have it just be me and myself and nature. But to not get on too many tangents, I was out there alone for these peaks, and they were gone. And I woke up the next day having like finished up this group and driven up, and they had just left that day. Ashley had just left that day earlier. And I wake up the next morning, thick smoke in the air. And one of the primary things I had designed the order in which I did the peaks around was the risk of fire closure, the most catastrophic risk of the whole endeavor. Because, a fire breaks out, the land is closed, boom, game over. It doesn't matter if you're on peak 99 and the fire happens on peak 100. No record, no completion, try again. And that was like one of the biggest, most chaotic unknowns of the whole thing, to have to hold and be present with the entire time, that I could do everything right and still fail. And so I wake up and, sleep deprived, sore, achy, fatigued, mental fog, and smoke in the air. So instantly my brain is like, oh no, it's over. Like, this is it. Like, I didn't even do anything wrong. It's going to be over. Like, where's this fire? So I start frantically trying to get information. There's broken service. So like I'm having other people try to send me stuff, and manage to piece together that, as far as I can tell, none of the land I have to walk through or peaks I have to climb are closed, but 3 of the peaks that I was going to climb later are right near the fire, where if the winds shifted, it could potentially get closed. So that would be a 15-minute drive normally, but Highway 20 was closed by the fire, so had to drive 8 hours to get around to these peaks, and so lose this chunk of the day and have to kind of start climbing in the afternoon, evening, and just kind of like struggling mentally to kind of recoup the momentum and the energy. And of course, now the air, instead of being bluebird and beautiful, is full of smoke, and to the degree that you almost have a taste in your mouth. And I remember just like wrestling with doubts and unsureness, and it's like, okay, I'm hiking out into the backcountry with a fire right next to me. Like, is this really a wise decision, right? That's also a thing. Like, if the winds shift and I'm out here, what is the cost of that? And so having to wrestle through all these thoughts. And I get out there, and I remember I crested a pass right as it was kind of hitting that golden hour. And of course, smoke kind of amplifies the golden hour and makes the oranges more orange and all that. And the first peak, Tower Peak, came into view that I was going to climb in this group of 3 that I needed to get done before, in case the fire spread more. And it was just caught in this like perfect golden hour orange. And it was like at that same time, like I'd kind of been working through all of these like doubts and unsurenesses and just loneliness, like here I am alone and dealing with all this. And it was like I kind of had sorted that. And then I stepped up over and saw the peak come into view. And it was just kind of this like, yeah, okay, let's do this. I'm where I need to be. Keep moving forward. And then, hiked into the night to get to the base of it and climbed the 3 of them the next day. But it was like this deep low point that was a whole lot of some of the more difficult emotions we face as human beings layered on top of each other. And just having to continue moving forward while feeling all those. Yeah. So, in other words, it was a metaphor for life.
I was just going to say, I'm like, he's talking about the spiritual path. Like, you're just bushwhacking and you're falling into the valley and the forest is on fire, but you just keep going. And we always talk about like, oh my gosh, if you can just keep going with yourself, and wrestle all those things you got to wrestle that are deep within you in the corners of your joints. And you get to the top. Like the view is life changing, right? It's like it's transformation in an instant. That was beautiful. So beautiful.
It's a powerful story to emulate. The mantra to just keep going. Like when you hit those brick walls, and we experience it in our life too. When everyone said, "Oh, it doesn't look like you should keep going." Like you get to that point, you got to keep going. And I guess this is the faith or trust that you may have inside, this belief that that there's something, whether it's front of mind at the moment or not, because it sounds like you had some doubts and fears, but there's a knowing that when you get to the top, there's something there waiting for you. You don't know what it is. You don't know good or bad, what we refer to as good or bad, but you know that something's there. There's that faith and trust. Is that pretty strong? That's pretty strong in you?
Yeah, I think, our pursuits as ultra endurance athletes and athletes kind of give us a very tangible, real lesson in this sort of metaphorical spiritual principle. In that, like, I think back to my first 100K, and I was more focused on Ironman than I was on ultra running at the time. And so I kind of was like, I'm just going to do it as a B race, as we do sometimes. And it's like, I'm going to do my first 100K as a B race. So I came into it with my legs already a little bit toast from just training right up into it. Like what a foolish thing to do, right? Like look back at some decisions I made in my 20s, like, you really thought you had more than you had. And anyways, my promise to myself was, it's like, okay, I'm going to go out super slow, easy pace the whole time, Unfortunately, I show up and a bunch of my friends who are lead pack kind of guys are there, and I'm chatting with them and and the gun goes off while we're still chatting. And so I just take off with the lead pack and still kind of chatting a bit, And then I get 5 miles deep and I look down and it's my heart rate is up in the 180s. And I'm like, it is mile 6 of my first 100K and I'm already mildly anaerobic. And anyways, somehow I make the decision to just keep hanging with them, even in spite of all this data, right? Talk about foolish. It's maybe it'll work out. So at mile 11, we just crested one of the first hard climbs of this thing. And my visions just starts to go boo. And I like have to flop onto the ground because I'm like, oh man, I'm going to pass out. And at this point I'm feeling queasy and my heart rate is insane through the roof. And I'm laying there. I'm like, this is over. Like, there's no way. I feel terrible. And I'm 11 miles into a 62-mile race. And I'm like feeling nauseous too and all that. And then for some reason, out of the sky, again, something hits me where it's like, there are people who will never run a step with the lead pack who come to these events and all they ever do, no hope of winning, no hope of prizes, no hope of age group awards. They show up to these races and they do nothing more than fight to stay ahead of the cutoff times, the entire effort. And it's like, okay, out of honor and respect of those people, I have three options. They pull me because I'm medically unsafe to continue. They pull me because I'm behind a cutoff time, or I go out through the finish line. And that was it. Those were the only options. Like, doesn't matter how it feels. I'm just going to keep moving. And so for 49 more miles, or whatever that math comes out to, not a math genius, for 49 more miles, I marched and wobbled, and I didn't do any crawling, but it came close. And slow shuffle jogged downhill when the seldom times I could, feeling nauseous. Like, it was one of those times where mentally I thought like, oh, at some point I'll feel better. Like, That day, no. I never, the whole time the alarm bells just kept going off like, there's no way. You're going to die. You're going to fail. There's no way. But the relationship I'd created with myself in that moment was I would look down at my legs and I would go, am I still moving toward my goal? And it's like, I could see the muscles physically carrying me toward my goal. And it's like, okay, shut up, mind. We're still making it. Right? Like, it's like that movement is still there. And so it's like, ever since then, I've had this agreement that in the moments like it gets hard, like the thing I'll do is I'll look down at my legs. It's like, they're still moving. So like all the other data is irrelevant, because the one data point that really actually matters is, am I moving toward the goal? And the answer is yes. So, okay, feel however you want. You're still moving toward it. And I think that's a huge like physical lesson we can take and apply to the rest of our lives, that it's really easy to get caught up in all the other information, all the other feedback, and all the things like it feels this way, or this person says this, or whatever else is going on. And then you have to get back down to the core of it and go, wait a minute. The physics say I'm still moving towards my goal, which is it's much easier to say that than to do it in the moment. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think there's a huge lesson there.
Mm. Yeah, those are defining moments, right? Really, really important defining moments. And now you have your connection. When you look down at your legs, that's what works for you. Like, what a gift that you have that now, and you've made that relationship, and now it's going to carry you through your future races. I feel some people miss those moments. That present themselves so clearly, and we don't grab them, which is actually the thing that is actually going to propel us forward, not the minutia in our minds. So, defining moments. Your return to triathlon, and was that at Ironman Oceanside? Was that your first race back? I'm so bummed that we missed you. Like, I think I had seen you out on the course at one point, because I remember your shoes, and I think I reached out to you on social media afterward. I'm like, those are sweet colored shoes. How did that go for you? Like, tell us, because we can't not talk about triathlon with
absolutely.
your background.
Absolutely. And I hope we'll actually talk about picnics as well before we hang up the phone. So since I'm on the athletic team, they now are the title sponsor of Oceanside in Barcelona for Ironman 70.3 and Ironman. And so I was like, okay, I can go participate in this race, and it would be kind of like it would be the first race. Actually, a little bit of the story that you guys might enjoy is one of the first things I did, because I told the storyline of I qualified for both the 2014 and 2015 World Championships, and then I went out the car window in May of 2015, and the 2015 World Championships were in September. Already had like paid and all that for the spot. So something I became obsessed with and consumed by and motivated by was to do everything it took. One of the ways I sort of reclaimed my personal power, if you will, and my independence, my sense of independence, is like, I'm going to go finish that thing. Like, I'm going to do whatever it takes, even if I hobble every step into the finish line. I'm gonna go finish. And I actually went and finished that race. I actually had a fairly decent swim time, and I don't know how I did it. I had one of the 2-sided power meters, and my uninjured leg was doing 70% of the power, and somehow I still biked like a top 300 bike time, with one leg doing all the work. But then, the run was like the slowest half marathon of my life. Like, I literally limp walked the whole thing. But luckily had like banked enough time in the swim and the bike that I could basically hobble my way all the way to the finish line. And that medal, I actually have it. I have it in a bag right now, because sadly something traumatic that happened at our school is one of my students was out riding their bike and got hit by a car, and it broke both of his ankles. And so I actually pulled it off this wall behind me, and I'm going to go hand it to him to keep for the summer, with the story and have it be a symbol for him. Like, hey, this is something that has some meaning. It's not yours. Don't get me wrong. It's not yours. I did the work to earn this one, but you can hold on to this until you have one of your own that you've made for yourself. and gonna give that one to him because it was a huge moment for me. So anyways, coming back to triathlon, because that had already been sort of done, like that feeling, those emotions that needed to be solved were solved there. Oceanside, and again, kind of this beautiful thing of the process I mentioned early on in the FKTs, they were very much my own. It was me and nature, and that's what it needed to be. But one of the outcomes as I came up to the Bulger's effort and after the Bulger's effort is now I'm much more interested in the opportunities I can create for others and the things I can share with other people and the experiences I can go share with other people. I think I had to go through a journey for myself first to arrive at that place where I was ready for it. And I'm sure like I'll still need more journeys into the wilderness on my own. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, we all need to revisit that space. But that was what coming to Oceanside is COVID had happened, and I'd had conversations virtually with all of these people who played a significant part in helping support me and tell this story and all of this, and never gotten to meet any of them. And they were all going to be at Oceanside. And so the decision to come back was less about me and like performing at the race. I mean, I was still beat up from the Bulgers. The first year I did Oceanside 2 years. The first year I did Oceanside right after the Bulgers effort. I mean, I was still like sore and not moving well at that point. But I showed up to the race for the sake of getting to meet and experience these people, these human beings in their real form, in person. And so that's really what it was about for me. It was less about, oh yeah, I'm going to come race like I used to. And more just like, hey, this is a chance to really sort of relish in the community that I have.
Are there any more triathlons on your schedule?
As of now, there are not. I do have, I alluded to picnics. I do have a couple picnics. So what picnics are, for the people who are listening that don't know what they are, the first one was made by David Gonzalez, called the Grand Teton Picnic. And, he humorously called it a picnic because it's, that's a leisure activity. And the picnic is you bike from Jackson Hole, Wyoming to Jenny Lake. You swim dead across the middle of Jenny Lake for a mile and a half. And then you summit the Grand Teton, which involves 5th class rock climbing. You then come back down, swim back across to your bike, and bike back to town. So it's this human-powered experience to get into nature. And that's the heritage. And I fell in love with the idea as I was doing these FKTs. I'm like, I have to figure out new applications of this in spaces where there's a beautiful lake and a beautiful bike ride and a beautiful mountain climb. And so I did one on Mount Shasta. And then the one I really love that I created is the Yosemite Picnic. And that's like, that's sort of a revered space in the outdoor space, because there's so many like, climbing speed records and this huge heritage of pushing limits in the space. And so it was one I took very seriously, like, I don't want to mess up even a minor detail of this because I'll get picked apart, like almost this fear, like the people who've been here longer than me will be like, so just meticulously plan this thing. And so you start at the base of El Cap, this iconic monolith of granite, and you're right there on the road underneath it, and you bike all the way up to Tenaya Lake in Tuolumne Meadow. So it's this epic, like 43-mile bike ride with like 6,000 feet of climbing. And then you hop off the bike and you swim across the length, right through the middle, across the length of Tenaya Lake, which I found out later is like a checklist, bucket list lake swim for people who are just into lake swimming. And I can see why. Like, it's one of the few swims I've ever enjoyed. I'm not a person that relishes in swimming. It's my weak point when it comes to triathlon. But it's like every time you're turning to sight, you're looking at some amazing piece of granite rising out of the meadow around you. It's like, okay, this is pretty cool. I don't even need to sight forward because I can just like see which way the rocks are going. And then you get out of that lake swim and you do this famed rock climbing link up called the Tuolumne Triple Crown, which is climbing the 5-4 slabs of Tenaya Peak. And then there's this mile-long ridgeline climb called Mathis Crest. And it's like a genuine razor ridge where you're like, imagine climbing across the back of your couch, hand over hand, except instead of being on your couch, you have thousands of feet of air on either side. And so it's like a mile of just like that type of climbing and running across these ledges and platforms between the climbing. And then you come off of that and you do the classic Cathedral Peak, which is, if anybody's ever Googled that peak, it's like this like perfect, like pointy triangle, this perfect pointy cone. It's called a cathedral for a reason. And it's this beautiful 5-6 rock climbing to get to the top of it. And then you run back down to the lake, swim back to your bike, and then you get to bomb down that 6,000 feet of vert back down to the base of El Cap, and then that's where the timer stops. And so getting to like bring sort of this full expression of my triathlon days and my ability in technical spaces and route finding and all of that to bear in one push was definitely one of my favorite FKTs that doesn't get talked about super often.
That's so cool. Oh my gosh. That's beautiful. Like, you've taken triathlon and you've made it very unique to you, right? Like, at least the adventures that you're creating for yourself. I think that's a perfect place to wrap it up. Although I feel like we could talk forever. And I feel like we're going to talk again.
I hope so. This has been a great pleasure.
Well, we were saying the other day, it'd be so fun to have Ashley and you and me and Beej do a podcast.
Do a smackdown, yeah.
Yeah, little couples thing. After your summer adventures, when you're back in school, we'll touch base with you guys, see if you're up for that.
Perfect.
Yeah,
that would be a lot
amazing.
of fun. That would be a lot of fun.
I think so too.
We've only been interviewed once together, which is kind of crazy, since it's like King and Queen of FKTs. Although other people, I do want to admit, other people call me that more than I ever refer to myself as that. It feels kind of, I don't know, silly to be like, I'm the King of FKTs. So I let other people call me that.
It's fun though. It's fun to hear you say it. I think that'd be good. She feels very like, she's got this like earth. She's, like more this like groundedness. And then I see like that fire in you. And I think that'd be a super fun conversation. We dive into some coupling logistics.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As all four of us are independent souls pursuing what we love in this world. But Jason, thank you so much for your time today and your patience. We had some technical issues at the beginning, and I've just really enjoyed hearing you talk, and I really hope that our listeners take away a lot of gold from this.
Absolutely. And I hope they enjoy the film as well. If they're just hearing about it here, kind of my heart and soul on the line with that one. So I hope they like it. I've said to people a few times when they've written back like, oh, I loved it. It's like, oh, good. Because I would have felt like if you didn't like it, you don't actually like me. It's, I think, like I said, Lauren did such a good job in those 30 minutes of truly capturing an amazing amount of story. So I hope they're able to enjoy that.
Yeah, it's so cool. And then we have a podcast with Bill from Athletic, who we haven't even launched it yet, but it will launch by the time that we launch this. And he kind of talks about how he, found out about you and talks a little bit about the film as well. So it's cool to get his perspective. We'll put links to all that in the show notes. People have to go and watch the film. It's 30 minutes. I've already watched it a few times, and it's super inspiring. And I just think that you're a beautiful soul living your purpose, and I'm grateful to know you. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for saying that, and I'm happy to be here.